In this video I would like to talk about the Slavic fairy tale which the first Witcher short story is based on. I'm using an article by Hayley Elise as a source, so I recommend checking it out as well. I'll put a link for it to the description box. As many people know, Sapkowski built The Witcher on classical fairy tales. Renfri from Lesser Evil is inspired by Snow White, and it's also mentioned that because of Eltibald's prophecy, mages started locking princesses born under the curse of Black Sun into towers, which led to young princes saving these girls, and that's clearly a reference to Rapunzel. Grain of Truth is obviously inspired by Beauty and the Beast, A Little Sacrifice is inspired by The Little Mermaid, and so on. But not many people know that the short story with Striga, which started it all, is also inspired by an old fairy tale. The first short story, called The Witcher, which Sapkowski initially wrote as an entry for a contest by Polish science fiction and fantasy magazine Fantastica, is inspired by a folktale chronicled by Polish writer Roman Zmorski during the Romanticism era in the 19th century. The original folktale tells the story of Marcin. He is a brave and pious young orphan who, despite hardship, has never given up his faith. He quickly shows this virtue by bravely rescuing a helpless old man being tormented by a bandit on the road. As the folktale goes, after they wander into a local inn, Marcin and the mysterious old man overhear that the king is offering a tremendous reward to any who can save the cursed princess in the church. The other local visitors of the inn agree that even the richest reward is not worth spending a night with the horrors that reside in that church. Nevertheless, the gossipy innkeep continues to blab about the tale to Marcin and his companion. It all began when the sinful king began an incestuous relationship with his sister. The two conceive a child, or rather a monster, black as coal, with a wide mouth full of sharp fangs and claws on her hands and feet. The name of the monster? The Striga. Following the tragic death of her mother, the deformed infant quickly finds her voice, accusing her own father of engaging in an incestuous relationship that brought upon her this cursed existence. She tells him that he must bury her in a full-sized coffin in the royal crypt under the church, and that there must be a living man patrolling the church every night after she is buried. Horrified and stricken with grief, the king agrees, and as he does, his daughter immediately dies. Consumed by sorrow and bewildered, the king finds himself with little choice but to faithfully carry out his daughter's instructions. However, as a few weeks pass, he realizes that none of the guards he sent to the church return. Driven by curiosity, the king goes to investigate, only to be confronted with a grisly sight: a pile of gnawed remains stacked in a dark corner of the church. Wrestling with a guilty conscience, His Majesty eventually decides that he must honor his daughter's wishes, and so he starts sending criminals to the church every night. Regrettably for the unfortunate ruler, his solution proves to be merely a temporary remedy. Soon there are no more criminals left to offer to his insatiable daughter, and the king is forced to import slaves from faraway countries in order to keep his promise. When Marcin hears all of this, he of course decides to help the cursed princess and meets with the king. He's promptly dropped off at the princess's hunting grounds, and the church gate is closed behind him. Similar to the numerous folk heroes, Marcin must adhere to the rule of three in order to overcome the Striga's curse. This is a common theme in folklore, where actions or words have to be repeated 3 times to have power. Other than this rule, Marcin has very little to help him in his task, other than a bit of advice from the strange old man and his blind faith. On the first night, Marcin hides in a pile of bones, and while praying to God, he manages to escape the Striga's fury. He's found alive in the morning, and everyone celebrates his survival, though the princess is not yet saved. On the second night, he climbs up into the choir loft and draws the sign of the cross on the door to the stairs to keep the Striga from following. The Striga piles up coffins to try and reach him, all the while yelling angrily at the boy, but ultimately can't get to him. Again, we know Marcin's ordeal is not yet over. On the third night, he sneaks into the Striga's coffin, draws a cross on the lid in chalk, and stays inside while the Striga desperately tries to get back in. After the clock strikes 2, Marcin opens the lid to find a beautiful girl lying in malaise. The folktale ends as most folktales do. Marcin gets to marry the now beautiful princess and eventually becomes the king. After his experience as poor, abused orphan, he rules fairly and kindly to all. This is the Polish version, and as you can see, The Witcher follows the original story pretty closely, although Geralt has to spend only one night in the coffin to lift the curse, but he mentions to Foltest beforehand that the number of nights can vary, and sometimes it can be 3 nights. In my country we have our own version of this fairy tale, which was written by Božena Němcová, also during the Romanticism era in the 19th century. It's called Spravedlivý Bohumil, meaning Bohumil the Just. It's very similar to the Polish version, but an important detail I should mention is that the old man who helps the main hero wants half of everything from the reward in exchange for his advice, and when Bohumil succeeds and gets the princess, the old man appears in front of them one day claiming his half of the reward. He orders Bohumil to take his sword and cut the princess in half. Bohumil is shocked, but because the princess loves him dearly, she offers herself willingly in order for Bohumil to keep his word. He reluctantly raises his sword to carry out the awful deed, but when he's about to strike, the old man shouts at him to stop and explains that it was just a test to see if Bohumil would rule justly and always keep his word. He tells Bohumil that if he stays this way, the heaven will bless him, and then he suddenly disappears, which indicates that it probably was an angel. In this version there's also no incest, but the royal couple can't have a child even after years of trying and praying for one. So the king one day says in anger that if God can't give them a child, the devil surely will. And that's how their daughter is cursed. But in all versions, it's very important for the main hero to not let the monstrous princess back in her coffin, or in some versions it's bad. The fact that she can't return to her slumber as the morning comes seems to be what ultimately breaks the curse. The Czech version of this Slavic folktale was adapted into 2 live-action fairy tales. The first one is called O Radkovi a Mileně and it's from 1990. And the second one has the same name as the original fairy tale Spravedlivý Bohumil, and that's from 1998. I've seen the first one as a kid, and it scared me and traumatized me a bit, as every good fairy tale should. When I later discovered the Witcher books and games in 2007, I immediately remembered this fairy tale. And this is one of the many reasons why I fell in love with The Witcher. Its world is built on things from our culture, things I grew up with, and therefore I feel very nostalgic about them. That's why I felt this bond with The Witcher almost instantly. I also want to point out that in every version of this fairy tale, the main hero uses either a circle or a cross as a protective symbol against the forces of evil, usually drawing it with a consecrated chalk. He draws the circle around himself or the coffin and the cross on some door or the coffin lid. And here you can see what was the inspiration for the Irden sign, which then probably resulted into the creation of all the other signs as well. The whole concept of witchers doing monster hunting and lifting curses comes from this fairy tale. One more thing I want to mention is that the reason why horror elements fit so well in the world of The Witcher is that it was built on these old fairy tales, and this one particularly is a good example of how old fairy tales were initially full of creepy and morbid stuff before they became sanitized. And that's all I have about this topic. Thank you for joining me in this exploration of the fairy tale behind The Witcher's Striga. I hope you find this enlightening and that it deepened your understanding of the dark medieval fantasy world created by Sapkowski. See you in another video.